Hello, good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm getting the sign that we are heard. It's a pleasure to have you here in Berlin. We are in the Academy building, the ancient library building, part of the Staatsbibliothek, old building today. Our guest in Collegium Quranicum today is Professor Arianna Rambach from Rome, Sapienza University. Most of us here in Berlin and most of you, wherever you are, have heard her name. She's a specialist for paleography, for Quranic manuscripts, for manuscripts in general. Her work about Damascus document is known. It's a pleasure that Konrad Hirschler is here today with us, at least in Zoom on the screen. Arianna and Konrad and Ronny Volland are editors of a book that came out last year, if I'm not mistaken, 2 years? 2 years ago already, about the Sham Efraklar, the Damascus document, an exciting treasure of ancient Quran manuscripts and other documents from the Qubbat Al-Khazna from Damascus. As far as I have learned from the writings of Arianna, there are still documents left in Damascus that you are describing in your articles. The subject of today's talk are scrolls. As most of you know, the ancient Quran is a codex. The Quran is following the codex medium that was heavily used in the rise of Christianity. There's even the idea that Christianity has triggered and somehow pushed the triumph of the codex. As we are leaving a bit the age of the codex today, can you hear me? I just want to get a last, is it okay? Yeah. As the codex is, as we are leaving a little bit due to the digital media today, the age of the codex, it is worth to reflect about the history of media change. I mean, if Marshall McLuhan is correct when he says the medium is the message,
sometimes also the message.
Arianna says sometimes the message is the medium. So we can check this. It's a pity that Marshall... Angehen, auflegen. It's a pity that Marshall McLuhan has passed away too early. It would be exciting to imagine an article, a study of him on the Quran. But let's come to the present, the scrolls. Yes, all ancient, nearly almost all ancient Quran manuscripts, we can say that for Sana'a and for Cairo are codices or fragments of codices. Pages, leaves that are still there that sometimes can be connected to other leaves. Today we know about, let's say, 4 large depots: Al-Fustat, Old Cairo, Sana'a, Kairawan, and Damascus. Everything in the east, Iraq, Iran, is still not very known. Ali Arai had a project hosted in our academy, which will soon get online, about Iran Quran, about manuscripts, Quran manuscripts from Iranian collection, a huge realm still needs to be explored. Today's topic is an outlier. Almost every early Quran is a codex, 99.9% this is true, but, and today we talk about the but, because there are outliers, and as far as we see, they are all from Damascus, or to put it other way around, those outliers that we know, Qurans in scrolls on parchment, following the study of Solange Henry from the 60s, right? 1960s. Solange Henry also meanwhile passed away, has left a large document about dozens of script rolls containing Quranic script. The last 3 months, we were honored to have Esra Gözeler, Professor of Islamic Studies in Ankara University, here as an Humboldt alumna. And Esra brought the topic that connects us today together. Script rolls from Damascus or Istanbul. In the article that I have sent in the announcement, Esra presented one finding. Today, we hear from Arianna other remarks. I'm very happy and proud that we have the 2 scholars on script rolls, Quran, early Qurans, here in Berlin. And as I have said in my Twitter message, I'm sure that our message, we get a bit closer to the solution. One brief remark, codex culture, yes, we used to say to browse through a book and to flip through a book, pages. Now in the internet age, we are also sufficiently enough talk about scrolling down a page using a verb that is, Ahmad pointed to this in our discussion, that somehow contains a reference to scrolls or rolls. Ahmad, what is correct in English? Scroll or roll? Scroll, yeah? Scroll, good. So I stop here. I'm happy that Arianna is today with us, and floor is open for you, please.
Thank you. So thank you, Michael. Thank you, Ezra, for this invitation and also for this shared interest in scrolls. Just, no, it's fine. I think I can check. So you can see the PDF, the PowerPoint. Yes, you can see it. Perfect. So early Masahif in scroll book form, as Michael was saying, are only attested in the Islamic book production by the Qubbat Al-Khazna find in the Umayyad Great Mosque in Damascus. Let's see if now I can, let's do this, yes, next, but I would like to do it by myself, just, I can do it. So the aim of this talk today is that the full version of this talk will be published in the first issue of the Journal of Late Antique, or louder, okay, of the Late Antique, to speak about chronology, Islamic and Byzantine studies. The aim is to reconsider these early Quranic parchment scrolls that are now in the Museum of Turkish and Islamic Art in Istanbul. These scrolls were first published, and they were, of course, before in Damascus, in the Qubbat Al-Khazna, as you can see here. I will not get too much into the history of the Qubba, just switching to the next one. These scrolls were first published in the mid-1960s by Solange Jory, un nouveau type de Moussaf, le Coran rouleau conservé à Istanbul, who in describing some 43 exemplars has the merit of having attracted attention to these unusual Quranic manuscripts. Jory has discussed the text of the Quranic Masahif, identifying the surahs contained in each exemplar, and has described their script. So I will consider in particular today the oldest ones of these parchment scrolls. The scrolls on vellum presented by Jory correspond to numbers 135, whilst number 3643 on Jory's list are more recent texts on paper, smaller in size, and made for a slightly different purpose, most likely as amulets or for protection. Back in 1965, Jory made only general hypotheses as to the origins and the distinctive book form of this Quranic text. Let's see if I'm able to go on. Yes. At first sight, the existence of Quran's copied on parchment scroll is not surprising. À première vue, l'existence des Qurans copiés sur des rouleaux de parchemin ne surprend pas. It is well known that early Arabic documents were written on folded sheets, suhuf, and the use of the codex introduced under As-Saffab by Khalid ben Marmak. On the other hand, Arabs were aware of the use of vellum rolls used to record the Torah. However, given the lack of any scholarly reference, one must conclude that if such scroll rolls ever existed, they have not come down to us. End of the quote. The examples that Ori cites lost Arabic documents in the form of scrolls and Hebrew Torah rolls do not fully match the text type and book form of the Quranic scrolls in question. In the first case, when speaking of rolled, folded documents, it is the documentary nature of the scrolls that makes the link with the Quranic scrolls containing the sacred book of Islam unconvincing, even if later on we will see that for Greek scrolls, a connection with the juridical sphere has been hypothesized, but this is by far earlier. In the second case, about the Torah case, Ori does indeed refer to a religious text, the Torah of the Jewish tradition, but the Torah book form, a roll, is fundamentally different to the Damascene early Quranic scroll. Since Ori article, almost no research has been carried out into the origins, uses, and meanings of these Quranic scrolls and their place in the history of manuscript production. And the lack of any convincing surviving examples leads us to ask the following question that you see now. Is it possible to connect the production of the Masahif in scroll form to the production of other religious, liturgical, devotional texts in the same book form? Is it possible to make a sound chronogeographical and socio-cultural link between these scrolls and the Quranic scrolls? Last but not least, it is possible to detect some common production techniques between these scrolls and the Quranic scrolls that might attest a codicological link between them. The production of Greek-Byzantine Christian manuscripts from Damascus and the Bilad al-Sham in general offer useful comparanda to the early Quranic scrolls with regard to both book form and text typology. It seems plausible to link early Quranic scroll to Christian book production in Greek, and as we will see also in Greek and Arabic, from Damascus and the Bilad al-Sham area between the 8th and the 10th century AD. This is done by taking into account the geographical and chronological coordinates along which the Greek-Byzantine production of hymnographic scrolls develops. The codicological connections, the materiality and functions of these scrolls, as well as the linguistic and cultural identity of the artisan working for the Umayyads and the scribes employed in the Umayyad administration. These are two different qualifications, artisans and scribes, of course, are different competences. Middle Eastern religious scrolls were fashionable manuscript products at the time and were also imitated, as we will see towards the end of this presentation, in other Mediterranean regions. Let's move on. Yes, okay. Let's consider the book form first. The scroll roll, because I found out that in English they are considered synonym, even in the specialized literature, but there is a but, we will say later about, terminology. The scroll roll, for the moment I employ both terms, has a long tradition in the production of manuscripts. Although the history of manuscript books after the passage from scroll rolls to codex, Michel was mentioning earlier, mainly focuses actually on the latter, on codices. Scrolls rolls were ubiquitous during the late antiquity and the European Middle Ages, or Islamic Middle Period, if you want to call it in this way. Indeed, scrolls rolls had been in use from ancient times in many regions, being attested in pharaonic Egypt and Ethiopia, as well as I said, in medieval Europe. It's useful at this point to spell out the difference between scroll, Latin rotulus, rotuli, and roll, volumen, volumina. Both typologies entail a folding movement, and in English, these words are used as synonym. As for the Arabic term for scrolls, I found used lifafa, lifafat, but also lafaif, and Dozy records that lafaf, but also lafafa and lifafa, is recorded in the Vocabulista in Arabico, the famous 13th century Latin Arabic glossary edited by Celestino Schiaparelli in 1905, something like this, in connection with the verb involvere. The folding, unfolding movement goes from top to bottom in scrolls, whereas in rolls it goes horizontally. The book form of Jewish sacred text, the Torah, belongs to the second category, it's horizontal. And the Islamic manuscript tradition, volumina, rolls, I will use rolls for volumina, are not attested as far as I know. As for scrolls, roduli, they had in different areas and different epochs the most diverse uses. They were used to record, for instance, royal and university accounts in England and in Italy, respectively. We can go next. And for genealogies and obituaries, although there are also music scrolls and illuminated scrolls, as well as those devoted to medicine and magic. So it's a book form quite it's somehow common, I mean, used for different purposes. In the Islamic manuscript tradition, scrolls were used for different purposes, and the scroll book form is attested in connection with various texts, both sacred and secular. We can mention, for instance, next one, literary scrolls. The only known example is the so-called Sahifa of Abdallah ben Layha, dating back to the 9th century, now in Heidelberg on papyrus, devotional scrolls, prayers, and magical scrolls. We can go to the next one. And also the next one you see here. And these are not manuscript, but block printed. And in this case, it's interesting because we see these are very small in size. I mean, they are long, they have the form of a, let's say, of a scroll, but they are not rolled, but folded, as we see in the next one. So this is something that also we have this form that can be folded and not rolled. This is the next one, just to see the, I would say, shaken, not stirred, more or less the same. And another thing, so other scroll example, the next one, are pilgrimage certificates belonging to the religious, devotional, and to some extent, the legal spheres. And then we have also calendars. And last but not least, we have the religious scrolls, the Quran, that is the next one. However, despite the fact that all these scrolls have share the same book form, they are not ipso facto linked to a comparable context of production, which would imply, for instance, the use of similar techniques, not even from the same period, I would say. But moreover, these scrolls also had various functions, thus reflecting the different cultural and religious sphere in which they were used. Today, as I said, I will focus on a specific category of scrolls, that is scrolls with religious, liturgical, devotional functions in the early century of Islam, as well as magical, apotropaic, and protective scrolls, even if these are a later one, but it's just to have the follow-up, let's say so, of this book form in the Islamic context. This choice limits the present research to a somewhat, I would say, specific textual group, not only chronologically, but also to a certain extent geographically. Furthermore, it allows us to highlight the connection between sacred and magical scrolls and their respective spheres. These are liminal yet distinct, even though it's sometimes possible to determine overlapping practices, interconnected rituals, and a common material culture. Scrolls can be considered a further item in addition to ostrich eggs and peacock feathers that attest to shared cultural practices functioning as Nile green stresses, and I'm quoting him, overwhelmingly within the material realm of religious practice. This is just a basic idea of how things are sometimes overlapping. In the Jewish tradition, both the vertical and horizontal forms of rolls and scrolls were in use. The Torah had, as I said, the roll form, whilst the Dead Sea and Qumran text were written on scrolls. And just after. Moreover, apart from these religious scrolls and rolls, the Jewish tradition also attests magic scrolls, as the one we see on the bottom of the slide. In the Christian manuscript tradition, next one, Greek-Byzantine scrolls for liturgical use are attested from the 6th century. And we see here the so-called Rotulus Beratinus being the oldest example. As for their form, scholars have explained these scrolls in various ways. Some consider that the scroll form is linked to the documentary tradition and draw a correspondence between the prayers in the liturgy and civil petitions. This is for Greek Christian scrolls. If we consider both the early Quranic scrolls and the Quran codices with a horizontal format that became widespread from the 8th century, representing, I'm quoting, a desire to distinguish the Islamic from the Jewish and the Christian traditions, end of the quote, using horizontal rolls and vertical codices, respectively, for their sacred scriptures, it is clear that, so we have Jewish with volumina and Christians who had codices. So the choice of having oblong codices and also scrolls in the Islamic context makes clear that the earlier manuscript tradition had a very strong influence on the production on Islamic manuscript. Jewish and Christian manuscript product were the most immediate models to adopt and adapt in early Islamic Quranic production. In the 1st century of the Hijra, such production was a part of establishing and shaping an identity and the identity of Muslims as followers of a then new religion and political reality. This was accomplished also through books, as well as through items pertaining to material culture. And one can do other examples, but I will skip this part. So this search for distinctiveness with regard to the book form of the Islamic sacred text seems understandable during the first 3 centuries of Islam, just into the early coinage, the Arab Sassanid, the Arab Byzantine coins. I mean, how many essays of finding their way they had. So they were looking for distinctiveness, since most of the population was still non-Muslim. Studies devoted to analyzing the process of conversion in the middle period all point that the 10th, 12th century as the moment of change in the religious orientation of the population. This religious demographic change was accompanied by, of course, a linguistic change and bilingual and digraphic Christian lectionaries, for example, that are witnessing the passage from Greek to Arabic in the liturgical context are attested from the end of the 10th century until the end of the 12th century, and were already written exclusively in Arabic by 1203. And now we are going to Syria, because it seems safe to say that Syria was the region where both the oldest Quran manuscript in scroll form and the most recent scrolls containing Quranic excerpts were produced. The oldest have been attributed on paleographical grounds by Raum to the 1st century of Islam, as I said, 8th to 10th century, while the most recent items date back to the 1970s, it seems so. I mean, I will not go too much into the most recent items, but these are the oldest one, just to show you, you know, from Istanbul. And the next one, you can see in the, again in Damascus at the National Museum, another scroll that is possibly one of the two items described in the 1930 Dalil al-Mukhtasar of the Syrian National Museum. These two scrolls were both written in a small nasb by a copyist Abdal Ali ben Maulana Ibrahim ben Abdalaziz. But the funny things, these scrolls are not mentioned by Nun list as far as I could see. Not this one, not one also, for example, in Italy, in Florence at the Ricardiana Library, that is worth mentioning. So the chronology, origin, and textual typology of the ancient Quranic scroll, as well as the technique employed in their production, can be linked to the production of Greek and Greek-Arabic hymnographic scrolls. You can see these are two and other specimens from Istanbul, just to have an idea what they look like, this old scroll. So as for the area of production, the primarily Damascene nature of the material, including the Quranic scroll stored in the Qubbat Al-Khazna, is in line with that of an important, and this is very important, and ancient, yet little known by Arabists, but very well known by Byzantinists, Greek-Arabic scroll, the next one, the Vatican City Scroll, Vatican Library, Vaticanus Grecus 2282, which was produced in Damascus in the 9th century. However, this doesn't come from the Qubbat Al-Khazna, but this is not the only example of liturgical Byzantine scrolls. Other such scrolls, just in Greek, were kept in the Qubba and are linked, therefore, to Damascus and the Bilad al-Sham area. Let's go to the next one. So now we see the material coming from the Qubba. The period of production of both the Greek and Greek-Arabic hymnographic scrolls, that is, goes from the 8th to the 10th century, as well as that of the Quranic scrolls, which correspond to between the late Umayyad and the early Abbasid period, is another commonality with the distinctive production of this book form in the Syrian area. Regarding the type of texts recorded, we can say that both the Greek, Christian, and Arabic Islamic scrolls generally contained religious text intended for oral performances, hymns in Greek, with instruction for the officiant in Arabic, as in the Vatican Grecus 2282, and in the Quran in Arabic. Let's go, these are other fragments just to have an idea. From both a technical and a functional point of view, the scrolls have various features in common independently from the language, Greek, Greek-Arabic, or Arabic, and the text type, Christian hymns or the Quran. And this common points are the same writing material, parchment, the same technique used to link the various collemmata that are sewn together with varying degrees of fineness, the ruling vertical lines defining the width of the column of the script, the writing on both sides of the scrolls of histography, and their use again for oral performance. All these factors connect the Greek-Byzantine and Arabic scroll in a consistent way, while the lack of any such common factor refutes any link between Greek-Byzantine and, for example, Beneventine Latin scrolls. Moreover, scrolls, by their very nature, represent a somewhat, I would say, neutral book form, since the sense of reading, scrolling, is vertical, no matter what the language of the text is. Conversely, both codices and rolls are revelatory in how they open of the meaning of the text. I mean, if you are opening a Torah, you are opening horizontally and you are scrolling from right to left, or better, from left to right. And otherwise, in a codex, when you open it and you have open a Greek Bible, you open in this way, as you know. So it's very telling, I must say. This is a point that should not be glossed over when referring to a period in which Islam was still developing its own Quranic book production and thus experimenting with book forms. The written tradition and religious scriptures of other cultures were assessed in the context of its own religious and linguistic needs and identity. Moreover, there is no complete Quranic codex for the first century of Islam. Therefore, the Quranic scrolls from Umayyad times are some of the first examples, even if defective at the beginning or at the end for material reason, but unfortunately, I didn't have them in my hand, so I'm just referring to the description by Ori about the length of the text. But so, we must say that the content of the Quranic text in these scrolls is quite substantial. And so they attest a continuous copy, at least, of Quranic text. And one of its earliest book form that is in contrast with the scattered folios, even if there are hundreds of folios from codices, Quranic codices, but they are not together anymore. So there is not this same, let's say, bulk of material evidence as in scrolls. Many Greek-Byzantine scrolls, some found in the very same deposit as where the Quranic scrolls were found, they were in the same deposit, were generally produced in Damascus itself or in the Bilad Hashem area, as I said. Other Greek-Byzantine scrolls were kept in the Sinai area, but possibly produced in the Bilad Hashem area. I'm thinking today, for example, the Christian Arabic production by Antuna, Daoud Ben Sulaiman al-Baghdadi, who was writing for St. Catherine on Mount Sinai from San Saba, that is more on the Bilad Hashem area. So the period of production of the Greek-Byzantine scrolls lasted from the early 8th to the 10th century. It corresponds, as I said, fairly well to the period of production of the Quran in form of scrolls, or at least to the earliest example of this specific type of Musaf. From a paleographic point of view, all the Greek-Byzantine scrolls are precious examples of the so-called mixed script, scrittura mista. You can see next one. This scrittura mista is a type of script first described in detail by Lidia Perria in 1984 and recently reconsidered in the light of an increased number of specimena by Francesco D'Aiuto. The Greek type of script used in the Byzantine scroll is not a factor that should be underestimated either if one considers the backgrounds of the functionaries working in the Umayyad chancery. We need only to think of John of Damascus, for example. Many of them have previous Greek graphic education, and it is not surprising to find in the mixed script in the Syrian scrolls a script exclusively employed as a bookhand linked to the chancery, yet never attested in document. So there were people working in the chancery for the, let's say, Umayyad, but they were never attested in documentary material. And it is useful to list the Greek-Byzantine scrolls produced in the Middle Eastern area with chronological reference where possible. These details, I don't know if there is in the slide or not, but I can give you the detail, in order to assess the material evidence that constitute the premises for Quran scroll production. So this one we have seen comes from the Qubbat Al-Khazna. We have another one. Yes. Let's go on. So these are still fragments from the Qubba. And now we have the next one, other Greek-Byzantine scrolls from Bilad al-Sham, and that are preserved in different institutions, Princeton, St. Petersburg, and mostly on Mount Sinai. This one and the next one. Yes. So in addition to these examples, I would also like to mention the model. So the next one is just to show that these are more or less, I would say, contemporaries, but pay attention, the Arabic script in the Greek Vatican scrolls is a later addition. This is my feeling. It was not conceived to go with the Greek. That is 9th century. Next one. Yeah. So in addition to this example, I would also like to mention the model of the Messianensis Grecus 177. Perhaps, because we don't know the model, but perhaps the model was in scroll form and dating back to 979, 983. The case of the Messianensis Grecus 177, a fragment of parchment scroll produced in southern Italy between the end of the 10th and the first half of the 11th century, provides us with interesting proof of the influence of the Middle Eastern production of liturgical scrolls in other geographical areas. Considering the Middle Eastern Greek-Byzantine production of liturgical scroll in mixed scripts, it is possible to discern that it spread in a twofold manner. On one side, we have Quranic scrolls produced in the same Middle Eastern area, Damascus, Bilad al-Sham, and they represent both continuity as far as the book's form is concerned and adaptation as regards the language and the religious content, because of course there are Quran in Arabic and not Greek liturgical text. In turn, Southern Italian liturgical scroll, such as the Messianensis Grecus 177, attest to continuity in terms of language and religious content, having a Christian text in Greek, and innovation, adaptation in terms of both book form, that is a scroll, and script, because yeah, it is a very peculiar one. This André Jacob made an interesting point in this contribution. So this adjustment concerning book form, script, language, and content do not affect the use of the text and their oral performance. Both the hymns in Greek and the Quran in Arabic were recited in a religious context, whether that was part of the liturgy in a church or the prayers in a mosque. From the perspective of social history, we can thus add to what has been observed concerning the history of color and the history of manuscript production. Books are the product of a given society which defines their forms and uses. Pre-existing forms linked to different social, linguistic, and religious contexts can be either accepted and used for similar ends in a given society, as in the case of the Greek-Byzantine and Qur'anic scrolls, modified, as in the case of the oblong Qur'anic codices, or consciously rejected, as in the case of the Torah roll book model in the Islamic context. So this is just to sum up all the point that this production, the Greek, Byzantine, Christian, and the Arabic Islamic one have in common: book form, the scroll, the writing material, the parchment, the technique to join the collemmata, the writing habits of histography, the type of text, the religious one, the type of use for oral performance, the area of production, Damascus and Bilad Asham, and period of production from the 2nd, 4th century Hijri to the, 8th, 10th century AD. I'm approaching the end. So some final remarks. Considering the substantial production of Greek Byzantine scrolls from the early 8th to the 10th century that can be localized in the Syria area or in Damascus itself, the link between Christian ethnographic scrolls and Quranic scrolls from the Qubba starts to become more apparent. The presence in the very same Qubba deposit of parchment scrolls in Greek, liturgical and devotional scrolls, and in Arabic, Quranic and devotional scrolls, as well as the production in Damascus of bilingual and digraphic scrolls, such as the Vatican Gregus 2282, seems to indicate clear links, at least to me. The broad artisanal context of Syria in the early Umayyad period suggests that there were no formal separation between religious communities, Christians, Muslim, or that newly converted Muslims with a background in the Greek Byzantine tradition were relatively numerous. These scrolls have the same geographical area of production, as I said, the same period of production, and perhaps were written with the same instrument, a left-cut pen, judging from the lozenge-like point in a Greek specimen, and from the execution of thick and thin trades, both in Greek and in Arabic. This is just a note on the writing instrument. The Greek Byzantine scrolls present us with a close means of comparison and offer a precedent for both the book form, the scroll, the text, a religious nature, and the use for the Quranic scrolls now in Istanbul. The time and geographical frame, Syria between 8th and 10th century, provide further evidence of a link between the production of the scrolls, and this would have been fashionable, and this is an interesting point in that period, particularly in Damascus and the Bilad Asham, but also in the Mediterranean area, as the southern Italian production attests. And I would say, above and beyond the link between a liturgical Greek Byzantine scroll and early Quranic scroll, I would like to stress the importance of always maintaining a comprehensive view of the material, whatever it is, Muslim and non-Muslim, I would say, from the Qubbat Al-Khazna. Only a complete view, not just limited to the material directly pertinent to our own field of interest, allows for a better understanding of the religious, cultural, and textual context in a multilingual and multicultural Syria. And with this, I stop. I mean, for all in all, it was, everything was there. There was already the answer in the Qubbat, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you for this multicultural, or this reconstruction attempt of a multicultural, multi-religious context of these particular Damascus document. Floor is open. Please raise your hand physically here in the room or virtually by using the techniques provided by Zoom. Are there questions? If you have questions here in the room, I come with you with this device to you so that you can speak. Those out there, there is a question from Konrad. Farah, can you take care of it? So, Konrad has to. Yeah, you have him?
Yeah, Konrad.
Please, Konrad.
Do you hear me now? Does it work?
Now, yes.
Yes.
Okay, okay, yeah. Hi, Arianna. Thank you very much for this wonderful paper. Really great take on the material. I wonder, I think the first question is, in Istanbul, the scrolls always have a different class mag number from all the rest. So all the rest is always Sham, Evrakları, 1, and then going up to 14,000. Whereas the scrolls are only numbered. They are, and I'm not really sure whether they are class marks or not. So in the article by Oli, it says Istanbul 1, Istanbul 2, Istanbul 3, Istanbul 4. So it seems to be that the scrolls are a distinct collection within the museum, which I never really understood. But I hope that we can be sure that it is really Qubbat Al-Khazna material, because I mean it's not the Sham Evrakları class mark. I mean I believe it is, but just out of curiosity whether you've dug into that. And the second question is, I mean, if we look at the materiality, it's quite surprising. Okay, I mean the scrolls are never complete, fair enough, but they still seem to be relatively well preserved in terms of not being squashed together or really brutally handled in some way. And if we think about our idea of the Qubbat Al-Khazna as this kind of rubbish depository where stuff was put into sacks at some point, transported, and somewhere else, it's quite amazing how good the quality or how well preserved these scrolls are compared to the Codice fragments, which seem to be in a much poorer state of preservation. So again, just the question whether you have any idea how we might, whether there's an explanation to that or not. But thank you very much, really great paper, enjoyed it.
Well, thank you.
No?
I try. Yes. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Gordon, for these questions. Of course, I didn't hold them in my hand. Ori worked together with the Surdel on the Qubba material back in the 60s. They were the first issue, I think, in the Arabica journal had a number of contribution in
Dominique Surdel.
Yes, les deux, Dominique et Janine Surdel-Tomine. And so I assumed through Ori that these were part of the Qubba, but we need to know more. But clearly, it's a very distinctive production, and I would say we should know more about the material in the Qubba to have certainty about their provenance. If we doubt about Ori, so, but then I would start to doubt about everything. So it's about the Surdel. Then who knows from where these things comes? But one has to, I don't know, to trust someone.
Next question. Here in the room, yes, Ignaz, I come over to you, please. This collage, self-designed.
So, go ahead. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your paper.
I have a question about the functionality of these scrolls, because I think that the morphology is clearly related to this Greek tradition, but how they were used? Because do you think that they were meant to be part of a full Quran, or only fragments that were read at certain periods? Because what you said is liturgical uses of the Greek scrolls, so it's not the entire Torah. So it's very particular, and I wonder whether you have thought about the same possibilities with the scrolls.
Thank you for the question. Of course, it's a very interesting thing. I would say the oral performance is, I think, the key to understand this double production, in the meaning that I would say the Greek, Christian, Byzantine artisan and copists, somehow they were asked to produce Islamic sacred books, and I would say probably they say, what do you do with this? How do you use? And Quran is recitation, I mean, it's psalmodiation. So probably rather than a codex that yet they knew already the codex form, the most, the nearest book form for an oral performance, like the Quran itself says in the word, they said, well, we do what we use for an oral performance, that is the scrolls. And I think in this way, they were asked to produce something that was not clearly, maybe there was also some hints. We don't want something that looks like a Jewish thing because we are Muslim, but still they were experimenting a lot. So at the very beginning, and also it might explain why at a certain point it ended, because then they found their way, Muslims found their way, the Quran found its own identity. At the very beginning, they tried what they were, I mean, offered from the previous tradition locally, if these are local production in Damascus or the Bilad Sham area. This is my feelings. And then about the length of the text, Quranic text Qubbat, it is true that you said that, for example, in the liturgical Christian tradition, there are just excerpts, not the whole text. And probably we don't have an entire Quran on this, but there are long excerpts. This is probably longer one than in the liturgical. This is my impression, but yet one would need to see them for real. I saw for real the Greek Vatican text that is more than 3 meters long. Is huge. We have the length of the Quranic manuscript by Ori, but again, one should check how much of the text of the Quran fits in them. This is, but probably they were long excerpts, but yet they are longer text than fragments all in all. I mean, at least one after the other.
Because I don't know anything about these periods very early, but in later periods you find in the endowment of Quran, about 3 years, that you find the instructions to read the Quran at certain parts of the Quran, at certain parts of the year, to memorize the work, the founder. And this is something that you find in the Byzantine tradition when they commemorate the Creator. So
definitely.
If it was to match the fragments of the Quranic text that we have in these scrolls with the kind of recitation that they were doing for, I don't know, particular times of the year, or a founder.
It's definitely an interesting point to look further. I mean, for the moment, I was just focused on the book form. But this is, of course, a next step that can be, I mean, but again, one would need them. Probably, maybe that there are in Oriod, I mean, the surahs attested more or less. So one can be there and study them one by one and see which one more often they are different or not. But of course, this is definitely something, a path that has to be followed. Thank you.
Are there
there's a question here from Ahmad Rahim, but I wanted to ask if there's a question somewhere outside in Iran, Turkey, Russia. I don't know. I don't see any sign. So, okay, Ahmad, it's your turn. Speak up loud.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. And I was going to follow up actually on Ignacio's point that perhaps one indicator of liturgical use could be the actual chapters themselves. That if they're defined and they're complete or where they begin, you could see patterns over the liturgical ritual of recitation. So that was going to be something I was going to say. The other point is you mentioned scribal culture within the Umayyad chancellery, and beyond what you said, that is that they take form and adapt it to a new function. Right. Is there anything else that you could say on the basis of these scrolls about scribal culture within the early Umayyad chancellery?
Well, the interesting part is the one, let's say the scroll in papyrus in Heidelberg, because again, this attests somehow I would say, I don't want to say a non-comprehension, but yet I would say they were not interested to follow the tradition, because usually literary texts in the traditional scribal culture are horizontal, and this is why the only literary text known from the Arabic tradition is the scroll. It's something very weird. But again, they were free. They were really free to employ other traditions from different religions in their own way. They were not, I would say, burdened with a heritage. They were inventing their own identity. And this, I think, is very, it's a creative moment. But of course, at the very beginning, the presence of this copyists that are producing documents, I'm thinking to, I mean, all the chancery in Egypt and to the papyri of Qurra ben Sharik, of course. But they attest that these professional scribes learned, all in all, some of them at least, a new language, because this was their profession. They needed to survive, and they wanted to survive. And this was what they could offer to the new political identity. So, yeah, I think this is the most interesting feature. How, because I have the impression that some, for example, architecture has been investigated in some detail, how Muslims they used, I mean, the early Muslim architecture reinvented the classical or traditional shapes, coins we know, but for the book production, it's still amazing to see the freedom to take very venerable tradition and all in all use them for their own purpose, free from any heritage. This is my feeling.
Other questions here or among the participants online? I don't see a hand. I don't see a question here. Habe ich Ton? Nee. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So, I don't know. I have a question to Arianna. Were you ever able to get in contact with Sordel and their photo documentation? That would be interesting to listen.
Well, actually, after the publication of the first contribution by Paolo Radiciotti and me in 2008 in Nia Rome, we sent an off-print to the Sordel, and I received a very polite and nice answer from one of their pupil. Now help me, Bernard, who is working with Sordel
Jean-Michel Mouton?
Help me.
Jean-Michel Mouton?
Damascus material. It's a man.
He's
He's a
Jean
man.
Jean-Michel Mouton.
Dominique Sourdin.
No, a pupil of them. He worked with them.
Damascus documents. Michel.
Michel Mouton.
Michel Mouton. Yeah.
Yes. So Michel Mouton wrote me a very nice email. I mean, he was charged. I mean, I was asked by the Sourdel to answer to my, kind dispatch of the, I would say, of the off-print. So we exchanged just this email at the time, and they were really grateful, but I never had the occasion to look into their treasure of photos that I know exist.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so there is still a lot to do also in terms of unearthing what has been done before, like it is in many other fields in the manuscript exploration of the Quran. Many of the people present here could contribute to what has been done in 20th century in the recent past and is not still accessible. If there are no other questions there is a hand, no, that was just an illusion. If there is no other question here in the floor or outside, I would thank you, Arianna, again for this stimulating presentation, and thank you a lot for your patience out there wherever you are. We are happy that we had that we could see at least on the screen some of our colleagues. Efim Rezwan is among us today. I'm happy. It's not a secret, Efim, if I mention that you will give the Corpus Coranicum lecture this year, probably in December, about an intriguing topic, the Quran in the Soviet Union. We will inform you about time and place. Probably it will be hybrid. Anyhow, we had a presentation and lecture and discussion on the difficult conditions today. Yeah, it's still not easy. We hope that we find an occasion to have you hybrid who were there on the screen now also in Berlin at the next time. Thank you very much, Arianna, and all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and until very soon.